What's going on, everyone? Dots Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys my Stamina Dragonknight PVP build for the Elder Scrolls Online Blackwood patch. This is a brand new build that I just recently put together in this patch. It's a different build than you've ever seen me run on my stamDK before, and honestly, it's like the most me build I think I've ever put together. It is a full damage over time build sporting 9 different dots. It's got good damage, good survivability, good mobility, good sustain. It just feels like a very well balanced build for the Blackwood patch, and I've been enjoying the builds quite a lot. I think of all the builds I've ever put together, I do think this build actually does have the most damage over time skills of a build that I've ever played. And so I obviously am enjoying it very, very much. And I'm hoping to play this build a lot the rest of Blackwood, as well as going into the next patch. Now, before we get into the video though, guys, like I do always say, this is just what I like, what I am using, and what is working for me. If this isn't a playstyle you'd like to run yourself, I know a lot of people like burst this patch. Obviously, you don't have to. You know, if you would like to change something, go ahead. This is just what I've personally tested out and I have felt to work the best for my playstyle. Obviously, I like damage over time playstyle, so I've been having a great time with this setup. And if you've been looking for a good high pressure dot build, this should meet those requirements for you. So without further ado, let's actually dive into the video, starting off with our sets. The first one that we are rocking is one piece of Dama House. So it gives us a line of stamina and a line of maximum magicka. So we do run a mythic ring on this build. And so because of that, we end up with 1 dead slot on the body, and Dami is just one of the best pieces to fill that slot simply because it gives you 2 lines of stats on just 1 set bonus. You know, I would say either this or trainee is typically what you see people if they have a free slot. But since I didn't really need any extra health, I decided to go with Dami instead to give my resources a nice bit of padding. And so I do like Dami for that reason. The other 5 piece that we are using is going to be 5 pieces of Pariah. Pariah gives us a line of health, 2 lines of armor, and a boost to our resistance as our health gets lower. Pariah, just one of the strongest defensive sets of the patch. Damage is so ludicrously high and through the roof that people have been trying out different defensive sets. I've been trying out different defensive sets, and I personally have found Pariah to be one of the most effective sets this patch. It also combines really well with vampirism, which we do actually run on this build. I do play this build as a stage 3 vampire, and so because of that, Pariah combines really, really well with the undeath passive from the vampire's skill line. So if we take a look at that passive, it reduces our damage taken by up to 30% based on our missing health. So as we get lower on our HP, our resistance is obviously going to be going up from Pariah, but we're also going to be gaining percent mitigation as we get lower. So it's going to make us, you know, tanky enough in this very high damage patch to be able to survive, kite, and heal ourselves back up. So those 2 things combine really well for a nice big defensive boost. We also do run as our offensive 5 piece. We run 5 pieces of Clever Alchemist with 2 lines of maximum health, a line of weapon damage, and when you drink a potion during combat, you feel a rush of energy, increasing your weapon damage by 675 for 20 seconds. So we can get a lot of value out of this set because the Stamina Dragonknight has very easy access to obviously major brutality from Rally, but we also get minor brutality from our Earth and Heart passives. So because of that, a set like Clever Alchemist, which is going to give us a massive boost of weapon damage between the 4 and 5 piece, we're able to get a lot of mileage out of that set because we're increasing it by 2 different percents from major and minor brutality. So we're able to get a lot of return from it, both offensively and defensively. This will give us big offensive burst windows, and obviously we're going to be able to get a ton of healing during this time as well, since our weapon damage will be so high. Now we are also, I'm going to answer one question about the set in a second, because people always ask me, why do I double bar it? But I will get to that in a second. We also are running the Malakath's Band of Brutality on this build. This is a dot build, and dot builds care about consistent pressure more than they do about burst. So I would prefer to have that just flat 16% damage increase over having, you know, the ability to land critical strikes. Also, we only have 16.4% critical hit rate on our front bar, and so because of that, very low crit build, and so Malakath just kind of fits on it perfectly, and again, is really good for that consistent pressure. Now, like I said, people always ask me when I talk about this build, why am I not double barring Clever Alchemist? Or why am I double barring Clever Alchemist? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to be able to run 5-1-1 on this build because I want to get a lot of mileage out of my medium armor passives, and also Shuffle, which is I do run on my skill bar, gives you mobility and snare and like immovability reduction based off of how many pieces of medium that you're wearing. So I want 5 seconds of immunity. So we also run 5 pieces of medium. We also get the good cost reduction. We get the extra weapon damage. We get a lot of good things from having a lot of medium. Also, the good thing about being able to run 5-1-1 is that you're getting your max benefit out of Undaunted. So from the Undaunted passives, you get 2% stats per each armor type worn, 3 types, which means 6%. Also, 1 piece of heavy and 1 piece of light will also counteract each other's negative effects, because the 1 piece of heavy will increase our magical damage taken by 1%, and then the 1 piece of Clever Alchemist increases our martial damage by 1%, but then those 2 things also have the side effect of decreasing those damages. So heavy will decrease the martial damage, and this will decrease magical damage. So they just offset each other perfectly. And also, I'm not going to lie, performance in Blackwood is very bad. And so because of that, I don't want to deal with trying to drink my potion on 1 bar and it not going off, and me bar swapping, and then it's like, oh, I realized my potion didn't go off, and so I got to go back to that bar and try to re-drink the potion. And plus, it's also really nice to be able to drink my potion whenever I want on either bars, whether it's offensively or defensively. And I feel like the ability to run Malakath and 5-1-1 like outweighs just single bar and Clever Alchemist, because with Pariah and Clever Alchemist with Malakath, there's no way to run 5-1-1 with Pariah. There's no way, because then I'd have to put 2 pieces on the body, which then makes it 5-2. So there's just no way with the sets I wanted to use to actually single bar Clever Alchemist and then run 5-1-1 still. So this is just what I decided to go with, and it's been working really well for me. I know some people, like I said, they hesitate when they hear, oh, double barred Clever Alchemist, but it's actually really good, and I do recommend giving it a shot if you've never tried it. Now, in terms of the way that the gear is actually set up, we are running, like I said, 5 pieces of medium. We have on the head, shoulders, gloves, legs, and boots. We run 1 piece of light on the belt and 1 piece of heavy on the chest. The chest is going to be reinforced, the belt is going to be well fitted, and everything else is going to be impenetrable, and all pieces are enchanted with prismatic glyphs. I know that is very expensive, but prismatic glyphs are extremely stat efficient to run on all slots. You get more stats out of prismatic glyphs on your single pieces than you do adjusting your attributes. And so I was originally running 3 pieces of prismatic and then 4 stamina enchants, and my health and my stamina were actually about the same, but my magicka was 700 lower. So from simply adding in all of those triglyphs, I was able to keep my maximum health at 28.7k and 30.6k stam, and then I increased my maximum magicka to 16,500 from what it was. So I definitely recommend going full prismatics. You get a lot of mileage out of them. Very good to use. We also do run 2 Swift because this build does not have a source of major expedition. We do need to get speed from somewhere, so I run 2 Swift on the jewelry, and then I run 1 Infused. The Infused on the Malakath band has weapon damage on it. One of the Swift has weapon damage, and then one of the necklaces also has stamina recovery. We then also run a Nirnhoned mace and a sharpened mace on the front bar with double dot poisons, because this is a dot focused build. And then I run an Infused great sword on the back bar. Our jewelry is Pariah, and our weapons are also going to be Pariah as well. Now, one of the things that I also have been getting asked about is why am I using stamina recovery and not using a reduce cost glyph? For those of you who do not know, it was actually changed a little bit ago that the reduced cost glyphs for stam no longer affect your core combat skills. And with major and minor endurance both being present on this build, I think you get way more effectiveness out of using a stamina recovery glyph over a cost reduction glyph. Plus, we already do get some cost reduction from being an Imperial, which I will discuss when we get to the races. And so I do think the stamina recovery glyph is the better sustained glyph here. Now, moving on to our skills, the first one that we're going to use is Blood Craze. So Blood Craze deals initial bleed damage with each weapon, which will also then give us the bleeding status effect, and then causing the target to bleed over 10 seconds and give us a heal over the duration. It's just a really good dual wield dot. It also gives us a heal over time. Again, I've also had some people ask, why don't you use rending slashes here? And personally, I don't feel the need for it, simply because the damage increase is only on the initial hit, not on the dot. and I don't need a snare because I'm already getting 12% increased movement speed from my swift pieces, and plus I already do have a snare on both Noxious Breath and Venomous Claw from the Dragonknight passives, and so I would greatly prefer the heal over time over the snare and a minor damage increase on our initial hit. If you personally don't feel the need for the hot, feel free though to switch that to reddening slashes. We also do use a Venomous Claw, going to be a primary dot on the build, giving us our poison status effect immediately, as well as giving us a solid poison damage over time, playing into the dot theme of this build. We are also using Fossilize. Fossilize is going to be our primary CC, as well as our way to get minor brutality from the Earthen Heart passives. Fossilize, in my opinion, is one of, if not the best crowd control in the game, so I really like to use it on the stamDK build. It's just really good, man. Puts people on the ground through block, dodge. It mobilizes them afterwards. It's just a very, very effective CC. And since we have a very respectable Magicka pool on this build, it costing 4,000 Magicka really is not the end of the world. We also do run Noxious Breath. This is for another dot on the build, as well as our source of Major Breach to reduce our opponent's resistances. This is also really good to help take people out of stealth. It's got a solid conal on it. Just be aware that with Noxious, if you do take people out of stealth with Noxious, there is a good chance that they can become desynced with their HP bar, so just be aware of that. Also, one little tidbit with Noxious, because the conal, whoever drew the conal on this skill, it's very bad. Very, very bad. So one thing that I've done, let's say this like little post here is my opponent. Sometimes I find it helpful when I'm fighting to actually take like a small step back and then breathe, you know, just because you put them at the widest part of the conal, so you're increasing their odds of actually being hit by it. Can be very finicky sometimes, but it's still a very good skill to use. I also do use Resolving Vigor for our basic heal over time. Obviously, you're going to use this on every stand build pretty much that you have, and I do run this on my front bar because I don't have any room on my back bar. For my ultimates on this build are actually extremely customizable. I'll typically use one of two ult combinations. I'll either use Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar and Corrosive on the back bar, or I will use Rend on the front bar and Take Flight on the back bar. But Flawless Dawnbreaker actually, in my opinion, much better for this build than Dawnbreaker of Smiting. This does give us a pretty hefty dot over 6 seconds. Again, another dot into the build. And plus, the good thing about this is it gives us 300 weapon damage for 20 seconds once we use this, which is the same duration as Clever Alchemist. So if we use Flawless DB and Clever Alchemist combined together, you are giving yourself an absolutely gross increase to your weapon damage, especially if you combine that with major and minor brutality. And because this is a consistent pressured build and not a burst build, that weapon damage, it gives your dots, it's so much pressure for a really long duration. So I really do like this skill on the front bar. It's very good. And plus we also do get a passive increase on that front bar to our weapon damage from the Fighters Guild passives. Back bar, we are using Executioner. So this is going to be the execute for the build. So this deals up to 400% damage to enemies with less than 50% health. I know I've seen some people run builds and they use spin to win. So I actually prefer the 2H execute simply because Whirling Blades cost 3,300 cost and Executioner only costs 1,700. And this has a longer range as well. It's easier to weave and use. I just find Executioner to be much better to use in my opinion than Whirling Blades. Feels a lot nicer to me. Personally, if you want to use Whirling Blades, you can always move Vigor to the back bar here and then run the dual wield execute on the front bar. But I personally prefer the 2H execute, which is why I do run that on my back bar. I also do run Cauterize. Cauterize is fantastic on a Stamina Dragonknight. It just scales really well with our weapon damage. Gives us major prophecy on the back bar, which, you know, we don't really need. Unfortunately, I wish this gave prophecy and savagery, but it is what it is. But the good thing about this, though, is that it's just a really solid heal, because if you combine, we have Blood Craze healing us, we have Resolving Vigor healing us, we have Cauterize healing us, and then we also have Rally. It's a good bit of healing coming in from the different skills in the build, so it's just a really nice skill to have. I've tried running different things here, and I personally find Cauterize to be the best. Really like it. You can potentially, if you want to, run Obsidian Shield here for the major mending. I'd run the Fragmented Morph personally if you want to give your Rally a bigger heal, but personally, I found Cauterize to be a little bit better myself. I liked it more. It's also way cheaper, does not nearly tax your Magicka pool as much. So I personally like Cauterize a lot more. I also do run Shuffle. This is our major evasion buff, giving us AoE damage reduction 20% for 20 seconds. And then we also can remove and grant immunity to snares and immobilizations for 5 seconds because we are wearing 5 pieces of medium armor. So this combined with Swift gives us a ton of mobility, so it's a very good skill to use. Volatile Armor is going to be our armor buff, as well as give us another dot on the build. So very good armor buff. And then obviously Rally is going to be our big burst heal. So we have essentially 3 heal over times from Blood Craze, Resolving Vigor, not bigger, Resolving Vigor, and Cauterize is kind of like a pseudo hot. And then Rally's our big burst heal. So this gives us major brutality for our weapon damage increase, minor endurance from our stamina recovery, and then gives us a big heal when we do refresh Rally, especially if we do have our Clever Alchemist up. We're going to be getting a disgustingly high heal from the Rally. I also like to run Corrosive Armor on the back bar, even though we don't have a lot of direct damage in this build, because again, this is a dot build. The defensive properties that this offers, plus the dot that it essentially gives you for 12 seconds, is still really, really good. This is good to pop while you're kiting if you're fighting super heavily outnumbered. This is also really, really good too. So very, very good skill to have on that back bar for some defensive ability if you do need it in a pinch. In terms of our stats, we have 16.5k maximum magicka, 28.7k maximum health, 30.6k maximum stam with 1963 resting stamina recovery. This build just chilling has about 3,900 weapon damage, although with Flawless DB and Clever Alchemist up, this will spike well over 7k. It'll be right around 7k, and that is not including continuous attacks. With continuous attacks, it's going to be way, way, way higher. So just standard, like with just Clever Alch and Flawless DB, you got your back bar glyph, major and minor brutality. You're going to be at about 7,000 weapon damage, and like I said, that continuous will only make it even higher. We run about 5,600 resting penetration, which will give us about 11.5k penetration with Noxious up, which I think is, plenty. We have 23.4k spell resist with 19.3k physical resist. Do keep in mind that those will increase as our HP gets lower from Pariah, and then we'll also have our major resolve buff up as well. Then we also have 2,600 crit resist on this build. We are using the Serpent Mundus Stone. The recovery Mundus Stones are very stat dense, so personally I find the Serpent to be really good to use. We also use the Lavafoot Soup and Saltrice buff food. Because we are an Imperial, we do not need really any health from our buff food, and so I'd rather just get a big boost to our stamina and our stamina recovery for this build. We also then, again, run Stage 3 Vampire for the reasons that I described earlier. Undeath is extremely valuable for damage mitigation. I actually tried running this build without Undeath, and I thought it was way too squishy, even with, I was a Nord for that setup, and even with being a Nord, and even with having Pariah, I felt like I just died too fast, and then Undeath, solved basically all of those problems. So Undeath, Vampire Stage 3, very, very much worth it. But when I did swap to Vampire Stage 3, I was still on a Nord. I was having a little bit of trouble sustaining, but Imperial completely solved that problem. Imperial is an incredibly good race for this build, and honestly one of the only races that I would recommend. The Nord resistance ratio has been nerfed so many times. It only gives about, I think, 3.9% damage mitigation. And so I was having a lot of trouble sustaining with being a vampire and being a Nord. And so it made sense, because I'm already gaining Undeath, which is 30% mitigation as my health gets lower. It made sense to sacrifice only a small amount of resistance mitigation, which doesn't even matter too much in the long run, because I'll have Pariah on anyway, and that's going to ramp up as my HP gets low. Because Imperial offers not only a lot of sustain through its cost reduction passive, which not only applies to your regular skills, it also applies to your ultimates. It applies to core combat skills like dodge, block, sprint, break free, everything. So it's also like a free piece of well fitted too, which is kind of nice. You also get 2,000 stamina and 2,000 health, which is way more than you get from being a Nord. So you get a really good boost to your stats, which gives us this really, really nice looking stat sheet. So Imperial and Stage 3 Vampire, really, really good combination together, and I definitely recommend it. In terms of potions, I also just use regular tri-stat pots. It's nice to have the restoration on all 3 pools. So that is what we use there. Pretty sure I covered all of this stuff over here, and we are ready to move into our champion points. So in terms of our blue champion points, we are running Deadly Aim. Deadly Aim does apply to all of your damage over time skills. Do keep that in mind, while it also applies to our single target skills. But mainly we're using it because it does apply to our dots. And then obviously we're going to be using Thaumaturge for another dot increase. So we're essentially double dipping on our dot increases from both Thaumaturge and Deadly Aim. We are also running Duelist Rebuff for single target damage reduction. And then we are running Resilience for the extra critical resistance so that we can kind of dampen some of that incoming burst. One of the nice things about Stamina is that I don't feel you need Unassailable as much simply because you do have major evasion. And so because of that, I'm able to still run 2 offensive stars and run 2 defensive stars and basically not worry about this because major evasion thankfully has me covered, and single target and crit resist is really what you need this patch. We also have Boundless Vitality for 1400 health, Ironclad for 1731 armor, Rejuvenation for 150 recoveries across the board, and then of course we use Juggernaut for the 10% damage reduction because typically a lot of people are going to go for their big burst after they CC you, so giving another 10% damage reduction after that is going to be very, very valuable. So that is what we run for our red CP, and then obviously green CP is going to be personal choice. Now, in terms of actual playstyle for this build, I mean, you can take a guess because it's a dot build. Your goal is going to be to maintain your dots on your opponent. So like I said, this build has 9 dots. You have 1 from Blood Craze, 1 from Venomous Claw, 1 from Noxious Breath, 1 from Flawless Dawnbreaker. You have 1 from Volatile Armor, 1 from the Poison status effect, 1 from the Bleeding status effect, which you'll apply when you apply your front bar stuff, and then your 2 from your double dot poisons, giving you 9 total damage over time effect. So your goal is to obviously maintain those on your opponent. Obviously, when you want to open up your opponent for a Dawnbreaker, you want to hit them with a Fossilize first and then follow that with a Dawnbreaker. Fossilize is also good just to increase your pressure since it will give you minor brutality. As your opponent gets low on health, you're going to then want to start spamming Light Attack Executioner. Especially weaving in those light attacks is really important because our back bar is enchanted with a weapon damage glyph and it is infused. So you're getting a really big boost to your weapon damage when you weave on that back bar. So you really want to make sure you're hitting that when you are either doing Executioner, or the other thing you need to focus on with this build, maintaining your back bar buffs. The back bar is just like buff, 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 and they all have very similar durations, so you'll pretty much be like hitting these very similarly, like right in a row. So you obviously want to maintain these 4 and maintain your 3 dots on the front bar. When you want to heal, you simply want to obviously refresh your rally as it gets low, give yourself vigor, and then you're healing. With Cauterize, a really cool tip to keep in mind is that this does proc every 5 seconds. So if you're noticing that your Cauterize is near 10 seconds or near 5 seconds or 0 seconds, you do not actually want to refresh this. So sometimes, like, a good example will be if I am actually getting low on HP and I notice that, let's say my Cauterize is at, I don't know, I'm just waiting for it. Let's say it's at 2 seconds. I'm not going to refresh it because I'd rather it just run out, get the heal from that, and then refresh it again to essentially double heal. So sometimes, like if I'm fighting somebody, let's pretend Rally's duration is really, really low. I'll actually, if my Cauterize is, let's say, like I said, 2 seconds left, I'll refresh my Rally, let the Cauterize tick at 0 seconds, and then refresh the Cauterize buff. So I'm essentially getting 3 heals as opposed to only 2 if I had just refreshed the Cauterize. Besides that, the one thing that I get asked about a lot when I play this build is dots. You don't have a spammable. So what do you do if there's a situation where you would need one? It actually doesn't come across nearly as much as you'd think. Because you have 4 different debuffs to maintain on yourself, 3 buffs to maintain, or excuse me, 4 buffs to maintain on yourself, and 3 debuffs to maintain on your opponent, combined with using CCs, your ultimate, kiting, etc. I very seldomly actually need to have a spammable, because especially a lot of times if that need does come in, my opponent tends to be pretty low on HP anyway, and so I start light attack spamming with Executioner. But if there's a rare instance where all of your buffs are up on the back bar, you have all your dots applied on your opponent, you don't need to heal or kite, I simply go for dual wield heavy attacks. They weave in extremely easy, they're very fast, they're smooth to use, you restore stamina when you use them. Just really good to weave in the middle, but actually, like, when you're playing the build, it really doesn't come up all that often, but if it does, that is what I would recommend doing. Also, remember, using your potion at good times is going to be very important. I typically recommend using your potion when you are ready to apply pressure or you need to be really defensive in a pinch for the weapon damage boost, because it is tied to your Clever Alchemist, so you want to make sure that you use that intelligently and at the right times. But thankfully on this build, because again, Clever Alchemist is double barred, we do not have to worry about popping it on a certain bar. You can just pop it whenever you'd like to. But guys, with that being said, that is going to be it for my new build, the Venom build for the Stamina Dragonknight. I've been having a lot of fun with this build. I've actually been playing the stamDK more than my magDK recently. It's been a really, really good time. The build's been very fun. It's really cool to even be able to find and make a very viable, completely dot-focused build, especially in a burst meta. And so if that's something that you've been looking for, you will find good success with this build. I've really put it through its paces. No CP, CP, duels, 1vx, 2vx. I've done a lot of testing and playing with this build, and I'm really, really happy with how it came out. And it definitely feels very optimized for my personal play style. But guys, if you did find this video helpful and if you like the build, I would appreciate it if you left a like on it. Any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. If you want to see a written version, you can check it out. Linked in the description below on my website, dotsgaming.com. And for more ESO and other MMO content, feel free to hit that sub button as well as the bell to keep those notifications on. So thank you all so much for stopping by today. I do very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see everybody in the next one.